I first started collecting these stories after I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the hallways always smell faintly like cooking oil and damp paint, and you can hear your neighbors through the walls if they sneeze too hard. It began casually at first, just me talking to people at work and friends about strange noises they had experienced at home, but the more I listened, the more I realized how many people had gone through something that didn't quite make sense. The first story came from a woman named Sarah who lived alone in a 2-story rental house just outside a quiet suburban street. She told me it started on a Thursday night around 2:30 a.m., when she woke up to the sound of footsteps directly above her bedroom, even though she never used the upstairs room and knew for a fact no one else was supposed to be in the house. At first she convinced herself it was the house settling or maybe an animal in the attic, but the footsteps were too deliberate, too slow, almost like someone pacing back and forth above her head, stopping every now and then right over her bed. She lay there frozen, staring at the ceiling, listening as the sound shifted from the bedroom above to the hallway, then down the stairs, each step slow and heavy like someone was intentionally trying not to be heard but failing. She eventually grabbed her phone and texted her brother who lived 20 minutes away, telling him she thought someone was inside her house. But before he could reply, she heard the footsteps stop right outside her bedroom door. She said the silence that followed was worse than the noise itself because it lasted too long, as if whoever was there had realized she was awake and was now deciding what to do next. After several minutes that felt like an hour, she finally forced herself to turn on her bedside lamp, and when the light flooded the room, everything was exactly as it should be, door still locked, hallway empty. Nothing out of place. Her brother arrived shortly after and checked the entire house but found nothing, no signs of entry, no footprints, nothing in the attic or downstairs. She tried to convince herself it had been a dream, but she said what made it real was that the next night at the exact same time, 2:30 a.m., she heard the first step again above her room, slow and heavy, as if whatever it was had come back to continue where it left off, and that time she didn't wait to see what would happen next before grabbing her keys and leaving the house entirely. Standing outside in the cold dark street, while the upstairs light flicked on by itself. The second story came from a guy named Mark who lived in an older apartment building with thin walls and long narrow hallways, the kind where you can hear doors closing from 3 floors away. He worked night shifts, so he was used to being awake at odd hours, but one night around 3 a.m. while he was making coffee in his kitchen, he heard what sounded like a faint whisper coming from the hallway outside his apartment door. At first he thought it was someone talking on their phone, but the voice wasn't clear enough for words, just a low murmur that seemed to rise and fall like someone was trying to speak directly into the carpet. He paused and listened, telling himself it was probably a neighbor coming home late, but then the whispering stopped and was replaced by a soft knock, not on his door but somewhere further down the hall. He walked to the peephole and looked out but saw nothing except the dim glow of the emergency exit light. A few seconds later, the whispering started again, closer this time, almost right outside his door, and that was when he noticed something strange. The sound wasn't moving like footsteps or a person walking, it was just appearing closer without any transition, as if whatever was making it didn't need to travel through space the normal way. He didn't open the door, but he did call out asking if someone was there, and immediately after he spoke, the whispering stopped completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the entire hallway had gone dead. He stood there for several minutes before finally returning to his kitchen, but as soon as he turned on the stove to heat his coffee, he heard a soft scraping sound at his door handle, like someone was slowly trying to pull it without turning it properly, just testing it again and again in short pauses. He backed away and grabbed a kitchen knife without really thinking, staying completely still until the sound eventually stopped, and when he finally built up the courage to check again, there was nothing there except a faint smudge on the inside of the door handle that hadn't been there earlier, and that was when he decided he wasn't going to sleep that night at all, sitting on his couch with the lights on until sunrise, listening carefully every time the hallway creaked, because even though nothing else happened that night, he said he could still feel that presence lingering just outside his door like it hadn't left properly. And just before morning light hit the window, he heard a single soft knock again, right behind him, even though he was sure no one had ever entered his apartment. I didn't sleep after that night in Mark's apartment building. Even though nothing else happened immediately, the feeling stayed with him in a way that made normal things feel wrong, like the air itself was slightly off. He told me he started checking his locks multiple times before bed, sometimes even after he was already lying down, just to be sure, because the sound of that soft scraping on his door handle kept replaying in his head over and over. A few days later he said he tried to act normal again, went back to work, stopped mentioning it to anyone, but the strange thing was how the hallway outside his apartment started to feel different during certain hours, especially late at night when the building was quiet. He said it wasn't noise this time, it was absence of noise, like the usual background hum of the building would suddenly cut out for a few seconds, and in that silence he would feel like someone was standing right outside his door without moving. One night around 2 a.m. he was sitting on his couch watching TV with the volume low when the power flickered just slightly, not enough to shut anything off, just enough to make the screen dim for a second, and right after that he heard a knock again. But this time it wasn't on his door, it was inside his apartment, coming from the bedroom at the end of the hall. He froze immediately because he lived alone and had not heard anything like that before in his place specifically. And when he slowly stood up and walked toward the hallway, the knock came again, same spot, same dull sound like someone tapping lightly on wood. He didn't go all the way in, he just stood near the corner and looked down the hallway, and he said what he remembers most clearly is how the air felt colder the closer he got to the bedroom, even though the heater was on. He called out asking who was there, his voice sounding shaky even to him, and right after he spoke there was a long pause. Then a single whisper that sounded like it came from inside the room but wasn't clear enough to understand. He backed away and stayed in the living room the rest of the night with every light turned on, and when morning came he checked the bedroom carefully and found nothing moved, nothing open, nothing broken, but on the inside of the bedroom door there was a faint line of scratches that looked fresh even though he couldn't explain how they got there, and that was when he decided to stay at a friend's place for a while. But even then he said he would sometimes get notifications from his home security camera showing motion detected in the hallway at exactly the same time every night, even though nothing was ever visible in the recordings, just a slight distortion near the door like something was there but not fully captured. The third story came from a man named Daniel who lived in a small rural house he inherited from his uncle, isolated enough that at night you could hear animals outside more than cars, and he said he actually liked the quiet at first because it felt peaceful compared to city life, until the night he started hearing footsteps inside the house when he was the only one there. It began around midnight, while he was in the kitchen making tea, and he heard a slow dragging sound coming from the hallway leading to the back rooms, like someone walking barefoot across old wooden floorboards but not lifting their feet properly. He assumed it was just the house settling, but then the sound stopped right outside the kitchen door, and after a few seconds of silence he heard a soft breath, like someone exhaling very close to the door frame. He stepped forward and opened the door quickly, expecting maybe an animal, or even wind moving something, but there was nothing, just a long empty hallway stretching into darkness. He said he tried to ignore it, and went back to bed, but later that night he woke up again around 3:10 a.m. because he heard the same dragging footsteps now moving slowly through the hallway toward his bedroom. This time it didn't stop outside the door, it kept going until it reached the exact spot beside his bed, and he could hear it clearly like someone was standing right next to him without speaking. He didn't move at first, hoping it would pass, But after almost a full minute of silence he felt the mattress slightly dip on the other side of the bed as if someone had sat down, and that was when he finally turned on his bedside lamp, and in that instant the pressure on the mattress disappeared and the room was empty again. But on the floor next to his bed were faint wet footprints leading back into the hallway. Even though every door and window in the house had been locked from the inside. And when he followed them the next morning they stopped right at the basement door, which he swore had been locked shut for years and which he had never opened since moving in. And the strange part was that the lock was now hanging open, slightly twisted as if someone had forced it from the inside. And he told me he never went down there to check what caused it because after that night he could no longer sleep in the house without hearing movement beneath the floorboards every time the lights went out, as if something had stayed there and simply learned to wait. And right before he decided to leave for good he said he heard one last sound from the basement door again, a slow deliberate knock from the other side even though no one should have been down there at all, and it didn't stop when he froze in the hallway. It just kept repeating like something had finally noticed he was still listening. The fourth story came from a woman named Lisa who told me she still wasn't fully sure whether what she experienced was real or if it was some kind of sleep deprivation mixed with stress, but the details she gave were too consistent, too grounded, to dismiss easily, and she insisted that what made it worse was how normal everything in her life had been before it started. She lived in a mid-level apartment in a fairly busy area where you could always hear faint traffic outside and sometimes people laughing late at night from nearby units, and she worked a standard office job with a routine schedule, nothing unusual, until one night she woke up around 1:45 a.m. because she thought she heard someone softly calling her name from inside her apartment, not loud, not urgent, just a faint whisper like it was being spoken through a wall. And at first she assumed it was her imagination or maybe a dream blending into reality. But then she heard it again, closer this time, coming from the hallway just outside her bedroom door. She stayed still and listened carefully, trying to convince herself it was just a neighbor's TV or someone talking outside. But the voice didn't sound like it was coming through walls in a normal way. It sounded like it was already inside the apartment, moving closer in small steps. And what unsettled her most was that it was repeating her name correctly, slowly. As if whoever was speaking already knew she was awake. She eventually reached for her phone and checked the time while pretending not to react. But as soon as the screen lit up, the whispering stopped completely, which made the silence afterward feel heavier than before, and she said she could suddenly hear every small sound in her apartment in exaggerated detail, like the refrigerator hum and the faint ticking of the wall clock, until something changed and the air itself seemed to go still in a way she couldn't explain. And that's when she noticed her bedroom door, which she always kept slightly closed, was now fully shut. She hadn't moved it, and she was certain of that, so she slowly got up and approached it, placing her hand on the handle, and right before she turned it she heard a soft tapping from the other side, not aggressive, not loud, just 3 slow taps spaced evenly apart like someone was waiting for her to acknowledge them, and she stepped back immediately, not opening it. Instead calling out asking if anyone was there, even though she already knew no one should have been in her apartment, and right after she spoke there was silence again. But this time it didn't feel empty, it felt occupied, like the silence itself had weight. And she said she sat on her bed for almost an hour afterward just listening, until she eventually convinced herself it was over and tried to go back to sleep. But she woke up again just before sunrise because she felt the mattress dip slightly at the foot of her bed as if someone had just sat down, without making any sound walking in, and when she opened her eyes the room looked normal, but she could clearly hear breathing that wasn't hers, very soft and steady, coming from somewhere near the closet, and she didn't move for several minutes until the breathing stopped abruptly as if whoever it was had realized she was awake again. After that night she installed a small camera in her hallway thinking it might help reassure her. But she told me that the following night at exactly the same time the whispering started again, this time not calling her name but repeating a phrase she couldn't fully understand, and when she checked the footage the next morning there was nothing visible in the hallway except a brief distortion near the doorframe, like the image had bent for a second, and the timestamp showed a period of nearly 10 minutes where the camera recorded audio but no motion at all. And she said that was when she decided to leave the apartment temporarily. But even after staying at her sister's place, she continued receiving motion alerts from the camera at random times during the night, always showing the same empty hallway, until one morning she woke up to find the camera offline, and when she returned to check the apartment days later with a friend, the camera had been physically turned to face her bedroom door from the outside, even though she was certain she had left it pointing the other direction, and the strangest part was that the last recorded clip before it shut off completely was just a few seconds long, showing the hallway in perfect silence until something, or someone, stood directly in front of the lens, blocking the entire view for a moment before the feed cut out, and she told me she never went back to stay there again after that because whatever was in her apartment didn't seem to leave when she did, it just stopped making itself known for a while, as if it was waiting for her to return. And when I finished hearing all 4 stories I realized they all shared the same pattern in different forms, the sound of something inside the house that shouldn't have been there, always starting subtly, always getting closer, and always ending right when the person acknowledged it directly, and even now I still think about what each of them said at the exact moment everything went silent. Because the one thing they all agreed on was that silence was never actually empty afterward, it was just waiting, and the last message I received from Lisa weeks later was short and simple, saying she had moved again but still heard faint tapping at night, and in the final line she wrote that last night she heard 3 soft knocks right behind her bedroom door even though she was already standing on the other side of it, and that the knocks only stopped when she stopped breathing to listen more carefully.